All right. Hey, I'm recording, you're recording. Welcome for those of you who are watching or listening, because these are now both in YouTube and podcast formats all over the internet. You can
That's
even
right.
find OTXNT with Dr. Marquez on Amazon Audio, can't you? Are you official now on Amazon?
Yeah, Audible, Amazon Music. Yes,
Look at you.
anywhere that you want to find, the Baptist on the Bible podcast. But
Look at that. I feel honored. I feel like now I'm just piggybacking off of you here. So this is great. But we have another episode of OTX NT today. We're going to be talking about something that we started last week, which is on divorce. We were kind of centering on Jesus's words that we saw in Matthew chapter 5, looking at verses 31 through 32. And so what we want to do today, because this is kind of a four-parter, is we want to continue the discussion. We want to look at marriage and implications that this passage has for marriage before we jump into some of the teachings on another time on 1 Corinthians 7 and then the whole remarriage thing too. So today's episode is implications for marriage and what it should be and what it should look like, and then we can go from there. You ready?
yeah, I'm ready to go.
Let's do it.
And I think it's important. This is, we were getting into divorce and questions of remarriage. It's like we need to lay a foundation here of what does the Bible say about marriage. And I think that once we have a good understanding of that, it's almost like understanding sin doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't really grasp the holiness of God. And so, divorce, why is it such an offense? Well, when you recognize what God intends for marriage, you begin to understand how devastating it is when that is torn. And so, I'm excited about where this is going to go. Should we start in our prayer?
Do it, man.
All right. If you'll bow with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. So, okay, let's just go kind of throw back into the passage that we've been dealing with, right?
Yeah,
Which
and
is
just in case we have new listeners, I'm Dr. Andrew Marquez, and you are Dr. Benjamin Pate.
thank you. Yes.
All right.
If you've not listened before, but if you have, which you probably are, this is who we are. This is what we do.
And OTXNT stands for Old Testament, Christ, New Testament. And Dr. Pate's got an Old Testament PhD. I have a New Testament one, and we work through these issues kind of from a full biblical perspective.
But it's been helpful to have Andrew around right now because I'm preaching through Matthew, and I'm going to be in Matthew at my church probably the next 2 years going through this. And so as I grapple with the text, it's good to have somebody who's there, who this is their world as well, to kind of help me out. So as I've been preaching through, Andrew, these are the words, Matthew 5:31. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in a case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So we dealt with in our last one, right? Okay, what are the circumstances for divorce? One of the things I think we should probably then do is let's talk about, though, what are some major implications on marriage as a result of this teaching. So one thing I think that it's very, very clear in this, and I know you've got a passage you want to bring up in a second, is it appears that what Jesus is trying to say is that marriage is not meant to just be broken off for any reason, right? People were asking and they were debating what reason. And in one school, there's, at least from what we can kind of gather extra biblically, one is anything goes. There's another one that says adultery only. People are looking for answers of when and how should I be able to break this off? And it does appear from the Gospels that the window of what is acceptable to break a marriage is extremely, extremely limited, which gives us the implication, right, that marriage should not be easily broken apart, should not be considered, I would say almost ever. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the crucial piece here is, what does marriage accomplish? What does it do? And if we have a good understanding of that, then we can understand why God says, don't do this. What God has joined together, let no man tear asunder. And so even if you get divorced, the question is, does God even recognize that divorce? Or is that more of a human practical way of going about separating from your spouse? And then there's that question of remarriage and all of that. So, but if God pulls you together, and Jesus says, what God puts together, don't let anyone tear apart, it really makes it hard for you to say, oh, we fell out of love, let's just get divorced. That's, really devastating, again, because of what marriage pictures. I've got the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 up here on marriage. I think it might be helpful just to read it. But generally, the definitions of marriage are shifting. So this is where the Southern Baptist Convention stands on marriage. It says, marriage is the uniting of one man and one woman in covenantal commitment for a lifetime. It is God's unique gift to reveal the union between Christ and his church, and to provide for the man and the woman in marriage the framework for intimate companionship, the channel of sexual expression according to biblical standards, and the means for procreation of the human race. And so that is kind of a summary statement of what marriage is from a biblical perspective. And that is one of the most controversial things perhaps today that we'll say on this show here is a biblical understanding of marriage, because it's very countercultural for a number of reasons. But we see some key things here. It's one man, one woman. And if we go to Matthew 19, you're going to see that connection there. I'll tee that one up for you in just a second. It's also a picture of Christ in the church. And so we'll jump over to Ephesians and Revelations in a second here, Revelation. And the framework of sexual expression, companionship, and all of that according to biblical standards, because the idea also connects to procreation. And so a purpose of marriage from God's perspective is children. And this is also a reason for the definition of marriage as such. And so recognizing that marriage is doing a few different things, it is detrimental to start tearing it apart.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, once when you begin to think in terms of marriage like that, you begin to understand that the way that our culture is making marriage to be, our culture kind of makes marriage to be two people love each other, they should be bonded together. But understanding of marriage and its purposes biblically, you see that that procreation is at the forefront. That was, at least from Genesis on, the idea of fruitful and multiply, like that's an intended. God wants population to continue, and I think that still applies to today. I don't think that. I think couples that this is one that I'll just throw out there. I think if you think that because the world is going to burn up, or that things are going to be too rough to bring kids into the world, there's a trust factor that's involved, and God wants us to continue that the world, that we continue to populate the world. There's studies that have done too in terms of overpopulation. That's not really a thing. It's definitely out there on, talked about, but the reality is the most of our planet is not overly populated. We have populated centers, but not necessarily in terms of the world and the resources we have. But then the idea that the oneness, right, to come together, what that should look like and how God has designed us and what marriage should be doing to be for a closeness to come together, but then that image too, of you brought up. So I think that this is what is being defined. I like how the Baptist Faith and Message describes it, because it's a lot more than just let's get together and let's make a union, right? Let's live together and just enjoy the benefits of that.
And you just can't lose the story. When Jesus is asked about divorce, at one point he says it's not the way that what it was in the beginning. And he goes back to Genesis, and if you recall, Adam was created, and then Eve was created from the rib of Adam. And so Adam was less of what he was before the creation of woman. But then the two become one flesh, and they are brought together in some sort of mystical way that what is meant by one flesh, it's the coming back together of what was once one flesh. And that coming together then produces new creation. And so this is an incredible thing that God has instituted, that we would seek to find another counterpart. A man would find a woman would find a man, and they could come together essentially and be reunited in that sense, in some kind of mystical way. And then the result is procreation. And so this, I think, is that picture, because if we go to Ephesians, and maybe I'm jumping the gun.
Go for it. Let's jump around. That's what we do.
if we go to Ephesians, there's instructions given. Ephesians 5, verse 25, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Okay, so that's how we should love our wives. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. And this is where it brings the bigger picture together. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each of you should love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So in the midst of this discussion, we see that coming together is a picture, a mysterious picture of Jesus Christ and his church. And that if we then jump to Revelation, we see at the very end of all things, a new heaven and new earth. And I see the holy city coming, and God has prepared that holy city like a bride adorned for her husband. And so believers of all time will be, in some sense, composing a bride of Christ. And what happens when the bride and the husband come together? They are united. And this unity with God is what is figured in the marriage covenant. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's a powerful image. And it also reveals that God is not divorcing his bride.
Yeah.
And so, there's a foundation, and everyone knows that what's written on that foundation is that God knows whose are his. 2 Timothy 2:19. And so he knows his own, he has purified his own, and he will never divorce his own. And so that is that unity that a husband and wife share. It prefigures the ultimate unity that we're going to experience with Jesus.
So I think right before that too, also, that just the idea that of not only of what is coming when the bride of Christ is presented to Jesus, but the picture of what should be taking place in your marriage should reflect the gospel too, right? Because he says things like that husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her to make her holy and cleansing. Like that's something that we should be mindful of, is that our marriages should illustrate the gospel to the world, that the way that the wife relates to the husband should be a picture for how the church should relate to Jesus, and that the way that the husband should relate to his wife, the reason I live the way that I do, the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, should be because ultimately what I find in the gospel already. And so I think that it's so big that, like you had said, you don't see Jesus saying, well, I'm done with you. You haven't held up your end of the deal. No, our marriages should try to reflect, there are going to be issues sometimes, but yet we continue and we persist because Christ is faithful through it all. And so that's why I think even why I think it's you'll see, even under issues that you'll see, it's never commanded to get divorced. Right. It might be permissible for the reasons we talked about in the last episode, but still, there's an image that comes with my marriage that should reflect the gospel and should be a talking point too, for here's why we do what we do. Here's what we're trying to show in our marriage even.
Yeah. And again, we go to Malachi just to keep it going. I'm just going to say what pops in my head, but Old Testament passage, you'll be able to clarify my muddiness here. God hates divorce, right? I hate divorce, declares the Lord. And so why? Because one, you're betraying the wife of your youth, and that God was seeking godly offspring. And so through the institution of marriage, he's looking for a way to take care of young women and women in general, who, especially in certain times in human history, have had very little protections and economic resources. So it's a vehicle to protect them, but it's also the very institution God has created to establish godly offspring, which means the perpetuation not only of the human race, but also of the godly race. And so that a godly man and a godly woman coming together will hopefully create a great foundation to raise children to come to know Jesus. And so this is the other piece that's missed today, because how many in the church are not married anymore, or how many in the church are playing house, so to speak,
Mhm.
fornication, that word sexual immorality, the idea that they're not going to make that commitment, but they want the rewards and the benefits of a commitment without the commitment. Thank goodness God doesn't do that to us. He makes a commitment in blood to us and seals the deal. And so whenever we play with that image, we're playing into, I think, not only a distortion, but a demonic picture of a God who is unreliable and unfaithful. And it's really devastating. And that's where you read Hosea and you see this wonderful picture of a man who is called consistently to go back and get his wife because God is not going to give up on his people. And if you think you've got cause for divorce, go read Hosea. Certainly he had cause for divorce, and yet he wouldn't do it because his relationship with Gomer was a picture of God and Israel.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a point too, just the illustration that also does for your family, the stability that brings and what that is to communicate of, once again, we do these things because God has commanded us to. This is a picture of why. So I do think here's something that I think it's easily said and should be said. I think that the norm and the standard for Christians should be that divorce is never mentioned. I've heard too many stories in the past year of Christians in their marriage that dangle divorce over the heads of the spouse to get them to do what they need them to do. They're frustrated with how life is going. I'm going to dangle that up. I think you're playing with fire, and that you should never entertain, because that's already fracturing things right then and there to do that. I don't think I think you need to be committed that is not on the table. And it needs to come not because, oh, well, we're Christians, we got to make sure we don't do that because God hates divorce, but it should be from this: is my commitment to my spouse is much greater than simply my feelings. My commitment to my spouse is much greater than duty. My commitment to my spouse is out of the oath, the covenant that I made with God to have this kind of marriage and to reflect those things in my marriage. And so we're willing to stick this out and to work through it. But I will not allow today. And if you're dangling divorce in front of a spouse, you are absolutely wrong.
Yes.
I think there's no place for that, to motivate. No, you find other ways to do this, but that is not the way to do it. I just don't think that's a Christian way to do it, because God doesn't want that to be a front burner way to motivate at all.
No, it should never be an option in the mind of a Christian spouse until perhaps we cross the one line that the Bible gives permission, either to separate or to divorce, which, again, sexual immorality, we can get into that abandonment issue and abuse. But generally, your attitude as a Christian going into marriage is that this is for life, and that's the vow you're taking. And that's the vow, again, that and in the difficulty, you're going to love your husband or your wife because you love Christ, and you've made a commitment before his people and before God himself that you're going to commit to one another. And so even if you have come to a point where you don't love your spouse anymore, you choose to love them in the way that you love Christ. And if you are called to love your enemies, surely you can love your spouse. And so those are the things that the Christian life's not easy. It's often hard, but the rewards are beneficial, and the rewards are incalculable. And just to continue on this, the marriage in the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, other churches that have sacraments, is considered a sacrament, which is a special way in which God gives grace. And in the Baptist world and a lot of the evangelical world, we don't have sacraments in that way. What we kind of referred to back in the Reformation is ordinary means of grace, that God has established certain ways that he just pours out his grace, and that we want to be recipients of that grace. And marriage is one of those ways, that as we love our spouse and the way that Christ called us to, that we receive a special grace, and that grace will help us to overcome difficulties. And that grace also then communicates to us what God has done. And the Greek Orthodox uses the word mysterion instead of sacrament. And that's very fitting for marriage, because of Ephesians refers to this as a profound mystery. Somehow in living out godly marriage, I'm communicating a mystery not only to myself and my spouse and my children, but to the world, of a coming unity with my maker. And it's just an incredible thing when you wrap your mind around it. But we approach marriage kind of like dating, and it's an experimental thing. If it works out, that's great. That's not a Christian marriage.
No. And I think that's a really profound thing. I think that's another thing that we need to bring up, which is the way that we should be elevating marriage, right? So you look at Hebrews 13:4, which says, marriage is to be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept undefiled, because God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterers. When you look at that word that's behind honored, it's that word of like jewels, precious, costly. And it says it should be looked at like that. It should be honored by all. And you know, I wonder if too many times in the church we don't actually do that. We try to we do it. We put on a good face when it comes to making a marriage ceremony, but we don't really know how long. I mean, I would say that a lot of people don't really know what the Bible teaches about marriage. They don't really know of how the roles should be in marriage, and so they haven't looked into it, spent enough time to even think about what should my marriage look like to actually honor it. But then the other thing I think that's important too is it needs to start from the ground up. Of like how more often than not, I think that we just make jokes of marriage. We make jokes about being connected to the old ball and chain, or the grandmaster, or the boss, or things like that. And I know that there's a place for that in your own marriage with each other, to have some fun, to point. I think laughter should be part of that. But I do think that we sometimes, as a church, even buy into that cultural view, which is marriage can be a pain in the rear, and it's not always fun. And I remember even like before getting married, there's like people who talk about, oh, once it's over, it's over. You can't go out and do the things you want to do anymore. We're not promoting it for the great
Right.
unity that it is that God is bringing two together. We talk about it as like you're losing your identity, your singleness, your ability to be who you want to be and do all the things. That's all out the window. When I think Christian marriage is like, but you're becoming somebody that God has made you to be. And when you get married, he's going to work on you and change you even more than you ever could as a single person. Now, granted, that's not to belittle singleness, but I think there's ways that he sharpens you and points things out that as you get married and then as you have kids, like there's a lot of new things that he's going to work on you on for sure. Especially when you put two and two together, right? Immediately become of their sin, and they become aware of your sin very quickly. And you've got somebody all the time to help show you things that you never thought about before. So I do think that we should probably watch how we talk about marriage, promote marriage, celebrate marriage. I don't think we do a lot of that. I think we just kind of, all right, great, we'll go to your wedding, thank you, give you some gifts, but we don't celebrate it and promote it. And I'll say this and I'll shut up. I do wonder if some of that is in reaction to, at least today, in reaction to some of the purity culture stuff, like the overemphasis upon get married as quickly as possible, the I kiss dating goodbye stuff. I wonder if some of that is people are afraid to do it because you don't want to swing the whole like, hey, just totally get married immediately, no need to date, that kind of thing. I think regardless, we should make that something that children want. It should be something that young people want. That it's a good thing. Proverbs 18:22 says, a man who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So that's kind of where I've landed on this, is we need to watch even our tone and how we talk about it. I think it should be promoted.
I agree. And it's very similar to our discussion on children. And the Bible's view is very positive. Marriage is viewed very positively. And again, it's the destiny God's designed for most of us. There are those that are called to be single, and I think we should do a video on that at some point, because we don't always honor singleness in that sense that the Bible calls some to, but that is a calling. But just being single and acting as though you're married, that's a sin. That is a sin that is worthy of hellfire in many places in the Bible. And so if you're listening to this and you're not married, get married. And also another thing, part of bringing people together is to help better to not be alone. There's also a thing I just would like to throw out there. If you're not getting married because you are trusting the government to be your provider, and so you're going to play house and try to pull in government benefits, The Lord sees what you're doing. That's defrauding the government. That is sin. And you need to get married in trust that God will honor what he says he will do, and that a husband and wife will work and support each other. But I see that that's also an issue too, is that I don't want to lose out on my government benefits. And so I will just act as though I'm married. That's not scriptural.
That's more common than people would think, by the way, too, of I withhold that because I don't want that funding to be shut off.
Right.
For sure. And
And
so
that hits
you do
people at all
everything
different
except,
age groups.
yeah,
So,
you do everything except get the, actually ordain it and do it before the Lord, because you don't trust that he's got it covered. In fact, money is that's a little bit of a higher priority. Keep that gravy train running.
Yeah. Consider the lilies. If God can take care of them, he can take care of you, and get your priorities right and trust the Lord. And otherwise be single, but don't pretend you're married and not get married. Again, God's called us to commit and take care of one another in that institution. And so that's a problem I'd see common. Well, I think we're running out of time. So are you able to close it out at this point?
Let me say this, and then I'll close us out. I feel like another major implication is marriage is supposed to weather any storm, right? When he says the two become one, right? That's the intention. Is not two become one for a time until it gets rough. Like he designed it to weather every storm, meaning and that's why his disciples later on in Matthew 19 says, that they say, if the relationship is like this, it's better not to marry, because he's saying, Jesus, it should last. And they're saying, but if I can't get out because it stinks sometimes, then why would I? And so I think there's some major things to understand is, yes, it's going to be hard. There will be times and seasons in your marriage where it's going to be hard work, or maybe not what you ever thought you were signed up for. But it's meant to weather the storm. And so God has in mind that stay. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, is that if he's called us for that, he will give us the ability to endure. He will give you the tools to be able to last. He will work on you. He'll work on the marriage. There's a trust factor involved in that too.
Well, I agree. I hope this has been helpful for people as we just discussed different Bible verses on marriage. Certainly our culture, it does not value marriage in the way that the Bible calls us to. And I think that we can do a lot just to encourage people in their marriages, celebrate anniversaries, celebrate weddings. And young ladies in particular, there's nothing wrong about choosing a vocation that involves marriage and children. And men, there's nothing wrong about choosing a wife and committing to her and giving her your best. So do it, get married. That's
I would say this too. Your life, when you say, because this is what people do. I keep saying this. You keep saying delay, because you have to live for you. You have to experience the things you have to live. Yeah. I would think that I think a lot of the adventure begins when it's you two together, right? Absolutely. We put so much emphasis on it. You don't want that just yet. Enjoy all of that. No, the adventure is there. And if you're willing to jump on that and to have that adventure. So good one, man. All right. Yeah. Well, next time we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 7. We're going to see what Paul says, because Paul offers one other scenario where divorce is permitted. And we need to talk about that. And we need to ask the question of, what is Paul saying specifically? Does that override? Is that what Jesus has said? Is he changing things? How do we deal with that? So we'll talk more about that. And then we'll talk about, in the fourth one is, okay, so when can I get remarried? If you are divorced and remarried, what does that mean for you? And so, we just want to talk through all of that. But I'm glad you guys have been with us today and talked about, just the benefits and the beauty of marriage. So you ready for me to close us out?
Yes, sir.
All right, man, here we go. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. God bless you guys. Thank you for watching, and we will talk to you later on.
God bless and take care.
Bye-bye.